Okay, this presentation is entitled A Virgin, Husband and Wife, Chastity, Family, and the Confucian Shaping of Catholicism in Korea. I gave this talk, I believe, back in 2007 at the Midwest Conference of Asian Studies. Yes. So, basically, this is the story of a Korean Catholic man and woman who entered into what's called a spiritual marriage in the late 18th century, and that is a marriage that a spiritual marriage is a marriage that is never consummated, that they remain perpetual virgins. And what's interesting is by studying these two people and their relationship, we see the interaction between the Neo-Confucianism that was dominant at the time in Korea and Catholicism leads to a mutual reinforcement of both worldviews. And at the same time, though, this tension between Neo-Confucian and Catholicism leads to a shift in terms of their identity and worldview, creating new ways of being Catholic, Korean, and Confucian. Now, if we look at the religion and the philosophies dominant during the Chosun dynasty, which lasted from 1392 to 1910, what we see is probably the most important worldview is Neo-Confucianism, which is kind of state ideology, is a kind of orthodoxy that is really dominant in the minds of elites and in the state, really guides its actions. And as part of this Neo-Confucian belief, the metaphysics is that the universe is governed by Li, which is a kind of cosmic pattern or dynamic harmony. And the role in the universe is to overcome our kind of selfish individual interests to work in harmony with the broader universe, with our community, with our state, with our family, and so forth. And what's interesting is, of course, the two major identities you have are the state, your loyalty to the state, and filial piety to your family, especially. And filial piety emphasizes the hierarchical relationship between parent and child, so obeying and following your parents. Now, this emphasis on filial piety is, in fact, the foundation of both the family and the state. And basically, the idea is that if you're a good child, if you respect your parents, you're also much more likely to respect your monarch as well. And ancestor rites or worship are important ways of expressing and encouraging filial piety, especially among the elite. And basically, ancestor rites are these rituals where you have a spirit tablet of your deceased ancestors, and you offer food and wine and rice and so forth to those and burn incense and bow to them. And the people commonly believe that the spirits of the ancestors would actually come down in the tablets and eat the spiritual substance of the food. Many elites didn't believe that, but what they thought, these rites were important because not only did they express your filial piety, they actually encouraged you to be more filial. So it's almost like a Catholic idea of a sacrament that not only kind of expresses how you feel, but actually gives you grace. And what's very important is the idea of the patriline. You perform ancestor rites for your ancestors, right? The people who are descended through your father, typically, and if you're a woman, you marry into the family, well, you don't participate in the ancestor rites, you prepare the food. The men, but you prepare the food for the men, who then worship their fathers and their grandfathers. And I think there's some women also included there too. Now, this is very important. This is kind of the foundation of the elite understanding of the Neo-Confucian understanding of the world and how it works. Now, what I've kind of shown, though, is that this illustrates the very different lives, religious lives, men and women lived in the Chosun dynasty. Right? It's men who perform ancestor rites, typically. Women are supposed to just make the food for it. And men tend to be the ones who follow Neo-Confucianism, whereas women tend to be more interested in Buddhism and shamanism. Now, we can't draw this line straight down. There's men who are who also, especially if they're commoners, will seek the services of shamans or Buddhist specialists and so forth. But the key thing is here is that in general, and similarly, there's also women who will believe in Neo-Confucian norms and so forth, but the key things is that they tend to have very different religious lives in terms of emphasis. And what I also want to stress, the filial piety is very practical in terms of how you you live your life. For example, the you want to have children and you want to encourage them to perform ancestor rites for you so that you don't become a hungry ghost, right? If you don't have anyone to feed you, you become a hungry ghost when you die, and that's a very uncomfortable existence. And this is especially when the common people believe this. But also, it's good to have people in your when you become old, you want people to take care of you. So children really feel are taught to feel a real strong sense that they need to take care of their parents, that they need to obey their parents, that they owe everything to their parents. And there's often a saying, you can never repay the debt you owe your parents, and so forth. And this is such a strong idea that there's an idea that if you die before your parents, even if it's an accident, it's called an filial death, because you should have preserved your life so you would have been alive to take care of them. So this is very, very kind of strict belief system here, this emphasis on filial piety. And it's not only just something that's important for the family, but also for the state as well. Now, how did Koreans learn about Catholicism? Well, first of all, missionaries, typically Jesuits in China, wrote books on Catholicism and on Western science in classical Chinese. And Korean elites were able to read these books. They could read classical Chinese. This was the language they used. The elites didn't write in Hangul, the vernacular Korean. They wrote in Hanmun, the classical Chinese. Now, the Catholic community was actually established in 1784 in Korea. A man by the name of Peter Isung-hun went to Beijing and received baptism from a Western missionary there. He then returned to Korea and started baptizing people. And this is the start. Now, what happens, though, is there's Catholics in 1784. They start spreading the faith. And by 1791, there's about 1,000 Catholics in Korea. And I want to point out, this is very interesting, because no missionaries came to Korea at this time. Koreans went out, brought Catholicism in, and started spreading it around themselves, because you can baptize, you don't have to be a priest to baptize. So they're baptizing people, teaching them to be Catholics, and so forth. Now, what is discovered, though, is in 1790, it's discovered that they are not allowed to conduct ancestor rites. Catholics are not to perform these rituals, because they're seen as a kind of idolatry, right? Because in the popular view of ancestor rites, the spirit comes down and eats this food you're offering. It sounds very, it sounds like you're kind of worshiping these other spirits. At least that's how the missionaries and the popes understood it. So what this leads to some problems, right? There's actually a split in the Catholic community. A large number of Catholics actually leave the church and apostatize because they can't accept this, that they're not allowed to perform ancestor rites. However, others decide to stay in the new religion, to stay Catholics, and they cease performing ancestor rites. And in fact, 2 Catholics were executed in 1791 because they burned their ancestor tablets. Now, there was a important the thing was, of course, to practice a normal Catholic life, you need a priest, right? You need a priest to perform mass, to have confirmation, to hear confessions. Those are the 2 big ones, are mass and confession, because that's how you get your sins forgiven, and it's your duty to go to mass in Catholicism to receive the body and blood of Christ. You need a priest to do that. There's a big problem because they don't have any priests, right? Well, in depending on how you date, if you use Western or Eastern calendar, Father Zhou Wenmo, this Chinese priest from Beijing, is smuggled into Korea in 1794, 1795. And he goes around performing the sacraments for people. And this is a huge deal. Now they have priests. They can have their confessions heard, so they can have their sins forgiven. They can receive the body and blood of Christ, and so forth. So this is a big deal. Eventually, though, by 1801, there's about 4,000 Catholics. And by 1795, there's 4,000 Catholics. By 1801, there's about 10,000 Catholics. And so what happens then is it's growing so large, the state realizes it needs to do something about these people who don't perform ancestor rites, which are the foundation of filial piety and loyalty to the state. And this leads to a large persecution in 1801.